This week, with diplomacy dead, can tourism triumph? We visit gorgeous Georgia as it lays out the welcome mat for Russians once again.
The app that dishes the dirt on unfair airport screeners and how to snare yourself the best seat on the plane. That's online check-in later in the show.
And he's mean, moody and in Mexico. We sent our very hardest to try his luck at Lucha Libre. Hello, I'm Fiona Foster. Welcome to Fast Track. Now, back in Soviet times, there was no better place for the Russian elite to go on holiday than Georgia. It was seen by people there as a kind of subtropical playground. But that changed back in 2008 after the two countries fought a short war. And since then, diplomatic ties have been non-existent. In fact, Georgia is often portrayed in the Russian media as unstable and unsafe for tourists. But now Georgia wants its cross-border visitors back, as Damien McGuinness reports from Tbilisi.
These Russian tourists are holidaying in enemy territory, or at least that's the view from the Kremlin, which regards the Georgian government as its arch-enemy. The scene today may be peaceful, but in 2008 Georgia and Russia fought a war, and Russian tanks almost reached these streets. Now the Russians are back, but this time on holiday, and to taste some Georgian wine, a product they can't get back in Russia. The two countries may be neighbours, but since the war 4 years ago, a war Russia won, the two governments refused to talk to each other. So Yuri, who's here for the first time, is surprised by the warm welcome he's received from Georgians.
A
lot of people back home were asking if it would be dangerous. A lot of Russians think it's unsafe because of the tense relations between our countries. But in reality, it's completely different. People here are friendly, peace-loving and happy.
At first I was surprised that not criminal.
Zulfiya was warned by her parents that Georgia might be dangerous. And Russia's foreign ministry even recently issued a warning, telling tourists to avoid Georgia. Zulfiya tells me that she's now discovered the reality is very different.
Normal people, not political, they really loves and likes Russian people because we are in history, we was always together and our mentality is very similar.
Georgian wine is a key part of the national identity here. Some archaeologists say it was actually invented in this region, but it's also been used as a political weapon in the run-up to the war between Russia and Georgia in 2008. Sales of this wine were banned in Russia. This almost led to the collapse of the Georgian wine industry.
With the ban still in force, many Russians miss Georgian wine, which was popular throughout the former Soviet Union, while many Georgian restaurant and hotel owners say they miss all the Russian visitors they used to have. 3 million a year before the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. By 2008, that number had dropped to just 100,000. So Rezo says he's happy that Russian tourists are now starting to come back. But with Russian troops still stationed in 20% of Georgian territory, he says, don't mention the war.
No, we don't talk about politics. We talk about wine, about our lives, and we always get on really well, but we don't ever talk about politics.
Government officials say that so far this year, 55% more Russians have visited Georgia than in the same period last year, and predict 500,000 for 2012. With no diplomatic relations, the idea is that Russian tourists will be able to act as ambassadors for Georgia back home, despite the ongoing political conflict.
the army should leave Georgian occupied territories. I mean, this is a political issue, that's why. But tourism is an absolutely different actually sector. But of course, when we are talking about impressions of Russian visitors, you know, I think that's a big promotion of Georgia, you know, as a tourist destination, as a safe destination.
But some critics say scrapping visa restrictions for Russians is a deliberate PR tactic, a ploy by the Georgian government to give Moscow the blame for the bad relations between the two countries.
It's bad because when one side have reforms and the second side have not reforms, it is not good for Russia's image.
The country's ancient traditions are helping Georgia win this PR war, both in the eyes of the West and, thanks to typical Georgian hospitality, in the eyes of many Russians themselves. A guest is a gift from God is a popular expression here.
The Georgian tradition is to be hospitable. It's how we're brought up. We're happy to give more to our guests today, even if it means we have less to eat ourselves tomorrow. It's how the Georgian nation is. We wouldn't save anything for ourselves if we can share it with a guest.
So learning more about Georgian traditions is about more than just tasting good food. The government here hopes that by more and more Russian visitors coming here and going back to Russia, telling their family and friends what a good time they've had, that'll actually undermine some of the negative propaganda about Georgians, which you often hear in Russian state-controlled media.
But for many ordinary people here, the war has had painful consequences. Tens of thousands of Georgians were forced to flee their homes, and Russian troops are stopping them going back.
It's hard for Georgians, obviously, but it's not the fault of Russian people, it's the government's fault. It's true that Russians did vote for that government, but they voted for what the government promised to do. In reality, the Kremlin then just does what it wants. People can't be held responsible for what their government does.
Wearing their traditional national costume, these Georgians offer up a toast for friendship. For Arina, who last visited Georgia many years before the war, it's a reminder of just how close Georgians and Russians used to be in Soviet days.
We've always really liked these traditions. I always remember New Year's Eve when I was a child and we'd always have mandarins. Where do mandarins come from? Well, of course, they come from Georgia. And obviously I remember wonderful Georgian films.
Georgian traditional singing, but in Russian. Politicians may not be singing from the same hymn sheet, but when it comes to people themselves, the relationship is a lot more harmonious.
Damien McGuinness reporting from Tbilisi. And if you've ever been to Georgia, we'd love to hear from you, whether you felt it was unsafe for tourists or if you think it's going to be the next big thing. Do let us know at fasttrack@bbc.com. And while we're on the subject, that's what many of you did about our recent programme on dark tourism.
Over 1 million people were exterminated in this camp, and every year 500,000 people troop through these gates to pay their respects. They've got a name for this: dark tourism. But is it tourism?
Claire Jones from Melbourne has just returned from Terezin in the Czech Republic, the site of a World War II Nazi concentration camp. She emailed saying,
I visited out of respect and for educational purposes, as I was never able to comprehend what one of these places would actually look or feel like. It was not for sheer curiosity.
C. Smythe from Canada agreed, saying these trips offer an opportunity to learn from what happened.
Lest we forget, history repeats itself. The misuse of nuclear energy and the Holocaust are doomed to be repeated if we cannot remember. The sacrifice of the dead must not be forgotten. If the price is a few thrill seekers, so be it.
Justin from California thinks it isn't dark to travel to places where tragedies occurred.
I've lived in Germany for some time, and it's really easy to have a great time there and to skip any Holocaust memorials. But I took it upon myself to go to a concentration camp to keep myself honest about my experience in this part of the world.
But Stephen from Sacramento says it's the last thing he'll be doing while he's away.
I feel that to visit areas of tragedy is a very morbid practice. A holiday's just that, a holiday. It should be a time to relax.
Now let's have a look at what else is making the news in the world of travel this week. Claims that Robert Mugabe has been appointed a UN ambassador for tourism have been denied by the UN World Tourism Association. They say the Zimbabwean leader has been asked to support tourism in an open letter that was also sent to all heads of state and governments worldwide. The letter was presented to the presidents of Zambia and Zimbabwe on Victoria Falls Bridge ahead of the 2013 World Tourism General Assembly, which will be jointly hosted by the two countries. If you're planning a trip to Greece, the British Consumer Group is advising you to book package holidays rather than travel independently. The watchdog says that should help protect your money if the country exits the Eurozone. If you do plan to book flights and accommodation separately, the advice is to book using a credit card and buy travel insurance with supplier failure cover. Burma will relax its visa regulations for business travellers from June the 1st. Visas on arrival will be available at Yangon International Airport to conference attendees and transit visitors from 27 countries. And after a 22-year wait, tourists at Tierpark Zoo in Berlin will be able to see a puma cub. The new arrival, named Masula, is the first successful puma birth there since 1990. Well, time for a short break now, but stay with us because coming up, Carmen's here with her look at the best the web has to offer canny travellers, and we head to Mexico to get thrown around by men in outlandish costumes.